Good morning. Good morning. Let's remove my so everyone can see me. Hope everyone is doing well. Good morning. Welcome to this month's edition of Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation's third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat. I am Thomas Duke Robertson, the Technology and Metrics Director for Oak Hill RCDC, which is the parent corporation of Healthy Kids Mississippi. I will be your moderator today. We recognize our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our program director, Sister Lottie Miner. In addition to this Zoomcast, we are restreaming today's webinar on our Oak Hill Regional CDC and Healthy Kids Mississippi Facebook pages. And also we are live streaming from our Oak Hill Regional CDC app. So feel free to share on your social media pages as well. Health services for the month of June include National Cancer Survivors Day, which is June 2nd, Fireworks Safety Month through July 4th, and Men's Health Month. Today we have chosen to focus on Men's Health Month. But before we start our presentation, I again encourage you to please share this webinar on your social media platform. Then make sure you have your pencil and paper ready to write down your questions, concerns, or comments, as I will be sure to save time for answering any questions you may have about the presentation. We have with us today Dr. Kent Key, PhD from Michigan State University, College of Human Medicine in the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health. And let's go over his bio. Dr. Key is a health equity scholar, health racial and ethnic health disparities researcher, and community engaged research methodologist. Dr. Key is an associate professor at the Michigan State University College of Human Medicine in the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health. In addition, Dr. Key is the associate chair for Community Partnered Institutional Administration. He has an interest in urban minority populations and uses qualitative research methods to evaluate the perceptions and lived experience with a goal towards the development of community-driven solutions for health equity. His focus is prevention. He believes it is the key to addressing health disparities. Dr. Key is principal investigator on an NIH-funded study focused on exploring the utilization of family health histories in the African American community. The goal is to increase the utilization of preventive screenings, increase health literacy, and community between families and providers by creating a culturally tailored family health history toolkit. During his tenure at the Michigan Institute for Clinical Health Research, or MICHR, at the Medical School of the University of Michigan, he sharpened his skills for minority population engagement across the lifespan and worked to create equitable engagement for patient-provider engagement. He served as a member of the National Patient Stakeholder Council for PCORI and PCORI's National Fall Prevention Council. In his community role, Dr. Key is the interim executive director of the community-based organizations partner and founder of the Community Engagement Studio of Flint. Dr. Key is also the founder and director of the Flint Public Health Youth Academy. Dr. Key is also the founder of the Community Ethics Review Board, a component of the community-based organization partners. In response to the Flint water crisis, Dr. Key served as a founding co-director of the Healthy Flint Research Coordinating Center in 2016. On the national landscape, Dr. Key is a past chair of the Community-Based Health Caucus of the American Public Health Association and past president of the National Community-Based Organization Network. Dr. Key is 2017's fellow of the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Leaders Program. In 2020, Dr. Key was invited to serve on the governor's community action team for the state of Michigan Task Force on COVID-19 and Health Disparities. In June of 2020, Dr. Key authored a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis in Genesee County, which was passed by both the Genesee County of Health and Board of Commissioners. In 2022, Dr. Key was elected chair of the Genesee Deputy Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission. Its motto, "You have not lived until you have done something good for someone who cannot repay you." And that is such an amazing motto to have to go by. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Key, and he can come in his own way. Dr. Key?
So first of all, thank you for having me to be a part of this great organization and this wonderful platform in which you provide information and education to the broader community. At this time, I will tee up my slides. I also would like to thank Mrs. Bettina Campbell for reaching out to me to be a part of this. There are some people who can ask you to do things, and then there are some people who just can volunteer you. We call it being voluntold here. And so she's one of the few who can voluntold me to do something, and I will do it because of who she is. So again, thank you all for this wonderful opportunity. So today we're going to discuss Black men's health and Black men and health. And this is a very important discussion, given the fact that African-American men are less likely to engage in health communication conversations within family, and then less likely to actually visit the doctor. And there are so many factors that contribute to this, but at the end of the day, it also leads to prematurity and death and dying from issues that are preventable. And so we want to have this deep conversation, understanding and exploring the role of the Black men in the context of health. So again, I won't belabor the point. Many of this was covered in my bio, but I just would like to just underscore that I'm a local Flint resident, born and raised here in the city of Flint, and got my introduction into public health in the AmeriCorps program while I was an engineering student, believe it or not. And so I began to understand what public health was and the impact that it was as a young person who was already in undergrad. And so because I was kind of behind the curve, I founded the Flint Public Health Youth Academy as a way to introduce Flint youth to the careers of public health as early as 8th grade, understanding that early exposure is critical to career exploration, and the fact that African Americans are grossly underrepresented in the fields of public health. We make up less than 4% of medical doctors in the country. We make up less than 6% of public health professionals. We make up less than 5% of registered nurses, and we make up less than I think 3% of those who lead public health organizations. And so we make up very few percentage-wise of those who do this incredible work. Yet when you look at African Americans, we are disproportionately impacted across health indicators, whether it's heart disease or stroke or hypertension, whether it is cancer, you name it. We are at the top of the list across most of those health indicators, yet we make up the least almost in the public health and medical workforce. And so we wanted to ensure that African-American youth in Flint through the Youth Academy were introduced not only to public health and medicine, but also were paired with mentors. And so that's probably one of my most heartfelt contributions to the field. So let's talk about Black men and health. Well, let's first just kind of ground this conversation by defining health. So health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Informed opinion and active cooperation on the part of the public are of the utmost importance to the improvement of the health of all people. And so we take this definition of health from the World Health Organization. Oftentimes when people think about health, they only think about it within the physical context. But we have to understand that health is not one-dimensional. It is multidimensional, it's multifaceted, and that there are many pieces to health. There's financial health, there's cultural health, right? There's spiritual health. There is so many different aspects to health, and if we are only focused only on physical health alone and not the social health or the social well-being of people, then we are not really rooted in the concept of what health is. So the World Health Organization made it very clear that you can be absent of disease and absent of infirmity, meaning have no sickness or no disease, and can still be unhealthy. You can still be unhealthy socially, financially, when we think about those social determinants of health and all the things that that brings into the equation. So we wanted to make sure that we root that health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it's not just physical, but it's also mental and social well-being. So what we want to discuss and kind of lay out as the problem is the fact that African Americans in general, but specifically African American men, are impacted the highest across chronic illnesses. So when we think about high blood pressure, we think about diabetes, and when we think about stroke, for example, these are just three of the chronic illnesses that we've lifted. You can see here, compared to white Americans, African Americans that you see here in the red are disproportionately impacted. And you can see that that is also creeping down. You know, it used to be that, you know, you only thought about these certain chronic diseases as you got older, but we see this same trend even in the age category of 18 through 34. So let's look at this. In high blood pressure, in the ages of 50 through 64, African Americans are most impacted at 61%, whereas European Americans at 41%. And we see the same similarity in ages 35 through 49, where African Americans are more impacted at 33%, where European Americans are at 22%. If we go over to diabetes, we'll see as the age progression increases that the disparity, it becomes greater or wider gap, right? So in the younger ages of 18 to 34, we're very close with African Americans and European Americans as it relates to diabetes. But as we get into the age group of 35 through 49 and then 50 through 64, we start seeing the disparities. We start seeing the gaps, right? Whereas 10% of African Americans are impacted more so with diabetes compared to European Americans at 6%. Now, here's the thing with these percentages. You also have to understand African Americans only make up about 13%, 12 to 13% of the United States population, compared to European Americans, which is about 50 to 60%. So even within these percentages, it still shows a disproportionate impact because 14% of the population is contracting high blood pressure and diabetes and stroke more so than the 50 or 60% of European Americans, right? When we look at stroke, we see that as you get older, African Americans are more likely to have stroke when compared to European Americans. And these are just some of the most common chronic diseases that I pulled as examples because there are several others. But the point is African Americans are more likely to die at early ages because of these causes, right? And as you can see, whether these causes are chronic illnesses or infectious diseases, etc., African Americans are more likely to die. And we see that even more so on the disparity in the age group between 50 and 64 years of age. We also see the disparity in the age group of 35 through 49 and the ages of 18 through 34. Now, oftentimes you hear me use the word disparity. Disparity is just a fancy scientific term to talk about a gap or a difference, right? So what we posit is that there should not be a difference across race. If people are dying from diabetes, it shouldn't be one group dying more so than another. If all things are equal, well, we know all things are not equal. And therefore, we have disparities based upon race. Sometimes there are gender disparities. Sometimes there are socioeconomic disparities. But for the sake of this talk, we're talking about race disparities, looking at African Americans and looking at the death rates according to the United States vital statistics. And this was the most recent data that they had in 2015. So we see here that African Americans are more likely to die at early ages from all causes, compared to our white counterparts. And this is just the chart form of the graph that you just saw. I noticed that different people have different learning tech styles. Some are more visual learners, some learn more from graphs, some learn more from charts. And this statistics that we're looking at are deaths per 100,000 people in the United States. So again, just kind of reinforcing that as of 2015, right, when it came to the ages of 18 through 34, deaths per 100,000 people, we see the disparities in 18 through 34, ages 35 through 49, and then ages 50 through 64. And as a health disparities researcher, my question is always, why is there a difference? What is causing the difference? If we're looking at infant mortality, African-American babies die at greater rates than European-American babies before reaching the first age of life. We don't want any babies dying before reaching the first year of life, but why is it that more African-American babies are dying? Another example of these disparities across race are breast cancer, right? More European American women get breast cancer. Well, of course, because they're 50 to 60 something percent of the population. African Americans, 12 to 14% of the population. And even though more European Americans women get breast cancer, more African American women die from it. So this is really setting up the tone, looking at the differences between race and African Americans, and we're going to take a deeper dive more specifically into Black men. But before we get into the Black men component, when we look at the African American race, then we also look at the social wellness of African Americans. And so we also look at things such as poverty and unemployment and home ownership, right? Not the ability to not be able to go to a doctor due to maybe costs. When we also look at health behavior, like around smoking and obesity and not being physically active, these also contribute to the disparities that we see in that chronic disease space, right? So again, you can see the African American rates in the red and the European or white rates in the greenish blue turquoise color. And so we see, again, African Americans have higher rates of unemployment. African Americans have higher rates of living in poverty and below the poverty line. African Americans are more likely to not own homes, right? African Americans are more likely to not go and see a doctor because of cost. We see that as we get older, African Americans are more likely to smoke than European Americans, right? When we get to the age 50 through 64, in 18 and 34, we were less likely. When we get around to ages 35 to 49, we're neck and neck. And then when we get to the older ages, we see the disparity where African Americans are impacted in a greater way. African Americans not active. Well, we see the difference here. And the disparity went from 19% in the age range of 18 to 34 to 28% in the age range of 50 through 64. And then the same with obesity. We see the disparities where we're more likely to be obese, even in our younger ages, where we see 29% compared to 22% in the age range of 18 to 34. But then we also see that gap widen in the ages of 35 through 49, and it continued to maintain that in the older ages. And this is according to the Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System and also the American Community Survey of the Census Bureau. And again, these are some of the social factors that impact our health. So let's summarize the problem. The life expectancy for African Americans is lesser than that of European Americans. But for the sake of this talk, focus on men. The life expectancy for African American men is 7.1 years less than that for Caucasian men. And this is information that we got from the Cleveland Clinic, but you can also look up the Robert Woods Johnson County Health Rankings model. And they also have a life expectancy page on their website as well. So why are Black men dying at greater rates and earlier than European American men? Well, some of it has a lot to do with the stress and the stressors of being a Black man in the United States. So there's untreated mental health disorders and unmanaged stress. Those are silent killers for Black men. We have to understand the impact that stress has on the body, how it wears down our immune system, how it puts us at greater risk of contracting illnesses, at heart disease, diabetes. It impacts our ability to fight off illnesses. It impacts our ability to sleep. It impacts our ability to digest food properly. Stress is a silent killer. And the stressors of being African American in this country is even compounded. Everyone has stress when it comes to economics. You know, there are poor whites, there are poor Hispanics, there are poor Asians. So we all have similar stresses, but then you also have to then overlay the impact or the stress of race and racism, right? There have been several studies done throughout the last few decades looking at jobs and careers and how African American men are less likely to get hired from a job compared to white American men. And oftentimes they just look at the name on the resume. These are things that have been documented. These are things that we know. Then there's stresses from relationship and family. And then there's also those stressors when you get diagnosed with a chronic illness. It creates another layer of stress. So not only are you dealing with that disease, but now you're also releasing more stress in the body that is now deteriorating your ability to be healthy and to fight off illness. So these are the top 5 stressors for Black men, but there are others. Here are some examples. Black men in all income groups are 50% less likely to have had contact with physicians during the past year, even when they have health insurance. So it's not just the African American men cannot afford to go to the doctor. Even those that have health insurance, they're more likely not to engage with their medical physicians. And this was one of the articles that was through the National Institutes of Health, looking at visibility and invisible trends in Black men's health. And then we also looked at the fact that in the next article, Giving Voice to Black Men and Guidance for Increasing the Likelihood of Having Usual Source of Care. Black men here, according to the data, are less likely to go to the doctor, are less likely to engage in family promoting healthcare conversations, are less likely to have a usual source of care, meaning that they don't go to their doctor on a regular routine basis. When they probably do go get care, it's at the emergency room level, and oftentimes that's too late. Black men are less likely to have a relationship with their doctor. They're less likely to trust the doctor, and we're going to get into some of those historical components of trust. And they're less likely to have a positive tone of messaging regarding health and engagement with their medical care provider. And this is as the study as early as 2019. So we're talking about Black men and health. Well, it's important again that we, you have the definition of health from the World Health Organization, but the Flint Public Health Youth Academy wanted to define health in a visual so people could see that it's a lot more than physical health. And so the young people here in Flint created what is known as the Health Diamond. And what they're showing you is that health is multifaceted, it's not one-dimensional. And so there's mental health, there's social health, there's financial health, there's community health, environmental health, emotional health, cultural health. On the other side, there are other dimensions. There's spiritual health, right? There are so many different types and manifestations that all in the totality make up our health. And so we had to be very clear that we also look at the social health of Black men. And what does that mean in the context of what we call the social determinants of health? Now, defined by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the social determinants of health are the conditions in the places where people live, learn, work, and play, and how that affects a wide range of health risks and outcomes. I want to rename that specifically for Black men. It's the conditions in the places where Black men live, learn, work, and play that affect a wide range of the health risks and outcomes that we see when we are assessing Black men's health. So let's look at the social determinants of health. The 5 normal domains, and they have a more expanded view of what they mean, but when we collapse them together, they normally fit into these kind of 5 domains or buckets. That's neighborhood and built environment, that's health and healthcare, that's social and community context, that's education, and that's economic stability. As we were looking at the social determinants of health here in Flint, and doing more broader education, we kind of broke it down into that definition into layman terms. So social means your interactions with the external environment. That means your friends, family, places, and different systems, education system, finance system, the law enforcement and the justice system, all of those and there's other systems, but these are all of the systems that impact your social interactions. And then determinants. Determinants are indicators, and it's something that is affected or influenced by. And then health, as we just talked about before, we talked about the fact that health is not just physical, but it is the context of physical, social, spiritual, and mental well-being. And so when we put it together in layman's terms, the social determinants of health is your interactions with the external environment that affect or influence your social, spiritual, physical, and mental well-being. So how do these social determinants impact Black men? So let's look. Economic stability. Let's look at employment. Let's look at the ability to generate generational wealth and income. Let's look at debt and expenses and medical bills, right? Then you have your neighborhood and your physical environment. That's housing, that's transportation, that's safety, parks, playgrounds, and walkability. Then you have education, that's your literacy and language, vocational training and higher education. Then you have food, that's hunger and access to healthy options. Now, oftentimes people put food deserts there, and I always challenge them in national meetings. And I challenge them because nomenclature or naming something is important. If you can't name it correctly, you can't fix it correctly. You can't address it correctly. A desert is a natural ecosystems. Deserts evolve naturally. What we are calling food deserts is not something that happens naturally. It's through policies and implementations. It's the reason why you can be in any urban city, whether you're in Jackson, Mississippi, or in Chicago, Illinois, or Detroit, Michigan, or Compton, or Los Angeles, or Memphis, Tennessee. You can name these urban centers, and you will see the same things happening related to food deserts, which is an oversaturation of liquor stores, an oversaturation of fast food restaurants, but little to maybe none grocery stores that actually sell fresh foods and produce. That's not a desert. That's not a natural happening. That's systemic. And so we don't use the word food desert. We use the word food apartheid. Then there's also community and social context in the social determinants of health. When we look at social integration and support systems, community engagement, and then also discrimination that leads to the various isms, whether it's racism or ageism or sexism, etc. And then we look at the healthcare system, not only your ability to have health coverage, but is it quality care that you're getting? Are you dealing with provider bias? Are you dealing with the lack of provider availability? We know by studies and in the data that African Americans and particularly African American men prefer doctors of their own racial background. But what happens when you don't have enough Black doctors in your community, right? And then again, looking at quality of care. And all of these things impact Black men's health as it relates to morbidity, mortality, life expectancy, health status, and healthcare expenditures. Now, here's another way to look at this and to look at it in a way where we see how it impacts the total person. So we're going to just imagine that this person on the left is an African-American male. Any African-American male. He can be, you know, Uncle TJ. He can be, everybody got a Leroy in the family. Uncle Joe in the family, right? And then the younger generation, we got a Raheem or, you know, a Hakeem or a Deshaun. This is them. That's that person on the left side, right? And we're going to look at what impacts this person's overall health and wellness, right? And you can see that 40% of it is socioeconomic factors that we saw in the social determinants of health, education, job status, family and social support, right? We see that physical environment is another piece, and that's housing and transportation, air quality, water quality, which, you know, we've seen the impact of that here with the Flint water crisis. And then the other 30% that impacts them are health behaviors that are normally driven by those socioeconomic factors. We know that data has shown us that where there is area with zip codes or communities that experience high levels of unemployment and high levels of poverty, use tobacco more, are less likely to have good diet and exercise, use alcohol more, and are more sexually promiscuous, whether they're engaging in sex to generate funds or economics. For whatever reason, we know that that impacts that. So those health behaviors oftentimes are driven by those social determinants that we see in the socioeconomic factors. And then also your ability to go to a doctor and get access to quality care through the healthcare system. So when we look at that, let's look at this same diagram through the Robert Woods Johnson County Health Rankings piece. The same information, but it puts it in the form of health outcomes, where we're looking at length of life and quality of life. Black men's length of life and quality of life is impacted by health behaviors, clinical care, social and economic factors, and physical environment. But we see that going to the doctor, and that's if you're going to the doctor and getting quality care, that only impacts 20% of your overall health and wellness. The other 80% are socially tied to the social determinants of health. And those health behaviors are linked to those social determinants of health. So if we can, as Black men, concentrate on those social determinants of health, we might 80% have an 80% chance to have a length of life and a stronger quality of life. So, Black men don't go to the doctor. As you can see, there are several articles that talk about the experiences Black men have had as to why they don't like to go to the doctor. A lot of this stems from the historical experiences that we will talk about later on, but the result is not going to the doctor means that the doctors, one, cannot do preventative screenings in time to identify or to catch the onset of an illness, which means that by the time you do go to the emergency room, the illness is probably taking hold of your body and shutting the body down, which means that we have higher rates of premature death, right? And so it's validated, it is encapsulated in several different studies that we need to work on getting Black men to their physicians. We need, whatever it takes, we need to get them there in spite of the historical impacts and things that we've seen with engaging with the medical institution. I mean, let's be real, let's be honest. Even when we think of the father of gynecology, right? We know history is real, and that African Americans and enslaved people were treated as guinea pigs. We understand that, right? The father of gynecology used Black enslaved women and did full hysterectomies on them without giving them pain medicine. We know the atrocious history. We, as a country, have moved forward with trying to put more protections in place. Is it perfect? Nothing is perfect. African Americans still feel like they're not necessarily heard fully at doctors. That's documented in a lot of the literature. But we must get them there to make sure that if there is something that's happening internally, that we can get on it, so that before it becomes stage 4 cancer, if we can get early on screening and prevention, we can come up with a regimen to help lengthen the life and to create a good quality of life. There are many things that impact Black men and their health. It's a fact that Black men are less likely than women to get preventative screenings, seeking timely medical care, or even being vaccinated for COVID-19 or the flu. And as a result of this, men, particularly Black men, have shorter lifespans than Black women. Black men tend to have higher levels of mistrust in the medical system. Mistrust is a particular issue among Black men because of the historic racism that we saw from things like the United States Public Health Syphilis Study. Now, people call it Tuskegee. I call it the United States Public Health Syphilis Study, because when we just say Tuskegee, we take the onus off of the government, and people think of the institution of Tuskegee. No, this was the United States government, right? So we have these historical issues and these historical experiences that have created this pathology for us, where people don't trust the healthcare system, particularly Black men. And as a result of that, and not going to the doctors and getting these preventative screenings, Black men between the ages of 45 and 54 die by stroke at a rate 3 times higher than their white counterparts. Black men prostate cancer risk is 75% higher than non-Hispanic white men. 2 out of 5 Black men have high blood pressure that starts at a younger age than the rest of the population. A California study found that Black men don't trust white and Asian doctors as much as they trust Black doctors. And then here is a website that you can go to on this last point, where you can look up and get even more statistics related to the disparities around Black men health. So why don't Black men trust the doctor? There are several reasons and factors. So what I'm going to cover is not an all-inclusive list, but these are just some of the factors that have come across in my studies, looking at Black men's health and looking at Black men's mental health. So they include historical trauma and the unethical treatment that leads to mistrust, toxic masculinity, and John Henryism. So again, examples like the United States Public Health Syphilis Study, known as Tuskegee. We know that the United States Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972, they recruited 60 African-American men, most of who were poor sharecroppers. And these men were told that they were being treated for bad blood, but in reality, the researchers were studying the natural progression of syphilis in them. So they basically were injected with syphilis, and the men were not giving proper treatment even after penicillin, which we know is the cure, was found to be an effective cure. And many of them suffered health consequences as a result and died, and even passed syphilis to some of their family members. The Mississippi study here shows that in the 20th century, it was common for African-American women in the southern part of the United States to undergo hysterectomies, which were referred to, well, and it was more so concentrated in Mississippi, this particular study, but these surgeries would often perform without women's knowledge or consent, and were done in order to control fertility. So in order to control the Black population, right, there was a government study that was set up that was really put in place to make sure that women were not able to reproduce, right? And again, this was done without their knowledge and without their consent. And we know that that is unethical behavior. More recently, people have been talking about the Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cell line study. And in 1951, Henrietta Lacks, African-American woman, had cells taken from her tumor without knowledge of her consent. And these cells were used to create the first immortal human cell line known as the HeLa, which has been used in countless scientific studies and has been used to fight off cancer and so many other diseases, and has created and generated literally wealth and dollars that were not shared with Miss Henrietta Lacks and or her family, because they did not know anything about it until more recently, when this kind of situation became kind of unearthed and we all found out about the injustice in this. So we see here that these are examples from times of slavery up until the 50s, and there are other stuff that's happening that we haven't discussed, but these are examples of why Black men don't trust engaging with the medical institution, because historically African Americans have been done wrong. And so there is this barrier that's based off history and cultural engagement that speaks to Black men, and that is a factor in the lack of engagement for Black men into medicine and into research. And then we have this concept of John Henryism. So it's a synonym for prolonged high effort coping with difficult psychological stressors yielding poor health outcomes. An example: man up, men don't cry, men don't get emotional, right? We keep it bottled in, right? So John Henryism is a strategy for coping with prolonged exposure to stresses, such as social discrimination, by expending high levels of effort, which results in accumulating physiological costs. The term was conceived in the 1970s by an African-American epidemiologist and public health researcher, Sherman James, while he was investigating racial health disparities between Black people and others in North Carolina. One of the people he interviewed was a Black man who, despite being born into an impoverished sharecropper family and having only a second-grade education, could read and write. This man had freed himself and his children from the sharecropper system. He had 75 acres of land by the time he was 40 years old. But by the time he was 50, he had hypertension, arthritis, and severe ulcer disease. James' hypothesis was that African Americans sometimes attempt to control their environment through similar attempts at superhuman performance, which may involve working harder at the office or working longer hours to prove one's worth. The downside is that it puts African Americans and African American men at greater exposure to contracting disease because we don't address the symptoms, right? So when we think about John Henryism and what he represented, it was you man up, you don't deal, you just work through it. You just work through it. Well, work through is not addressing it. And so John Henryism is a piece of what it is. You know, you don't cry about it, you don't whine about it, you just man up and deal with it. And sometimes manning up results into man down, whether man is down in his health, whether man is down in his mental health, whether man is down in his financial health. Oftentimes it means man down in premature death and morbidity. Another concept that is tangential to John Henryism, but not in its totality, is toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is an attitude or set of social guidelines stereotypically associated with manliness that often have a negative impact on men, women, and society in general. The term toxic masculinity isn't meant to imply that the idea of masculinity in and of itself is inherently bad, but toxic masculinity is bad. Masculinity becomes toxic when men feel they need to conform to rigid gender norms, acting like a bully to maintain a constant competitive advantage, or avoiding losing at all costs, or restraining one's emotions except for pride and anger, which are only acceptable masculine emotions to express in a toxic masculinity paradigm. Showing strength and aggression in moments of conflict, and then being dominant over women and other men, which is typically displayed through microaggressions. Three behaviors or beliefs behind the toxic masculinity phenomena is suppressing emotions or making distress. In other words, men don't talk about things that are impacting them emotionally, right? Because then you'll be considered soft, right? We teach young boys, men don't cry in public, or men don't cry at all, right? So then when that young man is growing up and dealing with institutional racism and so many things where he needs to vent, he keeps it in, and keeping it in is now creating stress, which is now going into all those other things that we talked about earlier, how stress increases our risk to actually contract chronic disease, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or stroke, etc. We want to maintain an appearance of hardness, and then violence oftentimes is a result of toxic masculinity because you bottle it up until you explode, right? Some examples of toxic masculinity include a man should suffer physically and emotionally pain in silence. Man doesn't need warmth, comfort, or tenderness from anyone. Other signs or examples is the only emotion a man should display is bravery and anger, and that a man shouldn't depend on anyone. Asking for help makes him weak. These are examples of toxic masculinity. In my study, looking at the family health histories here in Flint, and looking at what has been done nationally, we have found out that African American men are less likely to engage in conversations around health. And we know that family health history, another way to call that is inherited health. It describes the passing of genetic information from parent to child through their genes, right? And so when we look at the health history of it, family health history means that the sickness and health problems that your family has had, and that you and your family have similar genes, which is like a code that affects your health. And so these things are passed down from generation to generation. A lot of people in families have had at least one sickness that doesn't go away or last for a very long time, called a chronic disease. Some examples are cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. If someone in your family has had one of these sicknesses, you might be more likely to have it too. This is especially true if a person in your family has had that sickness and got it when they were at a younger age than normal. So again, it is important that African American men engage in these conversations. We need to understand what has happened to people in our family members. One of my friends, who happened to be African American female, had a full hysterectomy at the age of 24, but she did not know that a grandmother had a partial and two aunts had full hysterectomies, because you just didn't talk about it. Certain things you just didn't talk about. You know, there is a thing in our Black community called a culture of silence. It's not just when engaging with the police. It's not just stitches, snitches get stitches. We have a culture of silence that comes from slavery. And it has carried over into all the aspects of our life in current times. In slavery times, if a Black woman or a Black child or a Black man was abused or assaulted or violated by the slave master, whether it was sexual assault or physical assault, you couldn't talk about it. You couldn't say nothing to nobody in the slave cabin or the quarters where you live with your family. Because if you did, it could cost their life. It could cost you your life. So we learned to bottle these things up and to deal with it. Even when they knew that their children were being taken advantage of by the slave masters, you couldn't talk about. And now we have internalized that behavior in present times. It's not just you don't talk about it when the police ask you, did you see something? We have family members that tell their children, I'm going to go and have this procedure at the doctor. Don't tell my business to nobody else. What happens in this house stays in this house. That also meant nobody else, meaning your aunts, your uncles, your cousins. And if we don't share this history, our family health history, then when we go to the doctor, we're not able to tell the doctor where my aunt got diagnosed with this, or my uncle got diagnosed with this, or my cousin got diagnosed with this. It goes beyond just your parents and your siblings. And when we can't share that information, the doctors cannot set up the proper preventative screenings for us to make sure we stay a step ahead of those diseases that we may be more likely to contract because of our health history. So Black men are less likely to engage in health conversations or activities. Black women are more likely to be the custodians of health information. Black men are less likely to engage with their sons in health conversation, and Black men are more likely to keep their health status a secret. These are all things that impact Black men's health, even in 2024. So how are we going to take actions? What can we do? Well, one, we need to change the paradigm for African-American men to understand that all African-American men cannot leave an inheritance, cannot leave a financial legacy for their children, but they can leave a health legacy. And that's empowering the young people to come that comes behind them to know the financial inheritance that they have gotten health-wise from their family members, not the financial inheritance, the health inheritance that they have gotten from their family through the genealogy. We have to allow Black men to set their own health agendas and priorities. We also have to increase career pathways and pipelines to produce more Black men as medical doctors, public health professionals, and researchers. One, we know that African Americans are more likely to engage in health and research when they see people who are running it that looks like them. And then we have to create family health discussion opportunities, whether it's Sunday dinners or card parties, domino parties, or family reunions, holidays, when the family is together. Create ways to incorporate health conversations that are relevant to the family so that we can go away with that information and that we can create our own family health history legacy. So these are some of the impacts or factors that impact African Americans, particularly Black men's health. There are so many others. And I think we would have to take a week-long series to really get most of them in. But really looking at one, that African American men are less likely to go to the doctor. African American men are less likely to engage in conversations about health with family members. And then African American men are more likely to embody toxic masculinity and John Henryism because of what has happened to us as a people from the times of slavery up until now. And so we can be proactive by changing that paradigm and by helping African American men take charge of their own health agenda and their own health priorities. So with that, I will pause for questions, and I will also put my contact information up if anyone would like to contact me for more information or have further questions regarding what you have heard on today. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Robertson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Key, for that insightful presentation. And you hit every question that I had. I will just allow the attendees, if they have any questions, please just put it in the chat. But off the top of my head, what do you suggest? What's the good conversation starter for getting men to go to the doctor? You just don't want to like go straight full pledge on, hey, you need to go to the doctor, you need to check your levels, you need to do this and just that. What's a good conversation starter to just have with someone that's someone who hasn't been to the doctor in years or so?
Well, one thing you can start with saying, what would it take to get you to the doctor, right? What would it take? Sometimes just asking them what's important to them is very critical and pivotal in future discussions that could change that person's mind. One of the things that I also like to also think about when you talk about what does it take to get African American men to go to the doctor is also looking at, again, leaving this legacy of health, leaving this legacy of inheritance, right? We may not be able to pass down financial inheritance to our sons and daughters, but we can pass down a legacy of health information that could then be valuable to our sons and daughters and generations to come, right? One of the questions you can also ask them is, what is the barriers for you? What are some of the things that are prohibiting you to want to go to the doctor, right? And in those discussions, they're going to tell you stuff like, well, racism, or they're going to give you examples of unethical treatments that have happened, right? So then we might want to talk about things that have now been put into place, such as the Belmont principles, right? Different protections that have been put into place to help us not recreate Tuskegee, to help us not recreate what happened with Henrietta Lacks, etc. So I think it just starts with having a conversation. And I think also, let's talk about that John Henryism. Let's talk about toxic masculinity. These are also conversation starters. Hey, cousin Thomas, what do you know about toxic masculinity? Right? And you can tell me what you think, or you may not know what it is at all. Then I tell you, then I'll say, well, how do you think that impacts you as a Black man making the decision to ask for medical help, to ask for assistance when it comes to your health, or to talk about your mental health or your physical health with your family? So there are many angles to do it. And maybe that's something we might want to do collectively, is to kind of create a talking point sheet that people can go to when they want to engage Black men, to make sure that we don't have these disparities looking at race and gender specific to Black men. So that would be my response to you on that.
Okay, yes, we definitely could collaborate on that because talking points will definitely help out in the long run. And you said something at the beginning of your presentation about unhealthy just doesn't mean just physical, and I
Right.
think it's very important to elaborate on that. You have to be. I think we do like mind, body, and soul
Yeah.
when it comes to
Well,
health.
yeah, as human beings, we are a triad, right? We are spirit, soul, and body, right? And we know that soul is the place where your emotions lie. So we know that's your mind, right? And so I want to kind of get back to what I shared with you, and I'm going to reshare this slide. Health is more than physical. And again, this slide was made by the Flint Public Health Youth Academy because the young people wanted to be able to effectively talk about health to other youth, but they wanted to be real about it. And that's what they like. We need to keep it real. It's not just physical. There are so many dimensions of health. Health is not one dimensional. It is multidimensional, like a diamond. And again, spiritual health and so many others are on the backside of this diamond. So we can't, if we're only talking about health in the context of physical health, then we're not really talking about health. Because to talk about the physical part of this health diamond and not the other parts of the diamond is to negate what health really encompasses. So yes, this would be you could use this visual in your discussions as you were talking about health and the context of health. And then the other piece of it, I think, is that slide here that I showed you when we talked about clinical care, which is going to the physical doctor who's going to address your physical health. It only impacts 20% of your overall length of life and quality of life. The other 80%, 30% of that is health behaviors. The other 40 is social economic factors related to the social determinants of health. And then the other is physical environment, which is also related to the social determinants of health. So that's why I said earlier that if we focus on looking at Black men in the context of the social determinants of health and addressing those domains, we should see greater outcomes and longer length of life and quality of life for Black men. So that would be my response to your second question.
Okay, and while we're still waiting on anyone else who may have questions, the part about well, for me, I know personally, I make sure I tell everyone my age to go to the doctor because I'm trying to change the narrative of black men don't go to the doctor, and so
Mm-hmm.
I make sure I go to the doctor. I have a therapist. I,
Mm-hmm.
I just see it all. I just go all the way through, and plus because I'm paying for my own health insurance, that's another thing. So it's just very important to get
Mm-hmm.
men to get to the doctor, and I'm trying to just with your assistance with the talking points and this webinar. I'm looking forward to sharing this so we could take this even further because this conversation needs to be had. It's been needing to be had for a while now, and so I'm just glad to be a part of this, and I'm just thankful for you to come on and just share your information with us. And I just see a question come up for me. Um, no, okay, so that's not for me. That's but thank you, Dr. Key, for your time today. We appreciate you for sharing this much needed information, and we will for sure use this valuable information and resources to continue to talk about men's health. Um, Once again, we encourage everyone to share today's webinar in your social media network. Feel free to post questions or comments in the Zoom chat or in the social media comments. We will do our best to respond to each question. Dr. Key, before we open the mics for everybody, we just want to have friendly reminders. The next Ask Mary and Pet Zoom webinar is Monday, June 30th, 2024. We will also be having a syphilis webinar on June 27th, 2024 at 7 p.m. The next third Wednesday parent resource chat will be August 21st, and we'll be talking about childhood immunizations. So please be sure to join us and encourage friends and family members to listen also, because you don't want to miss this important information. Um, this has been a production of This has been a production of the Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, belonging, building, and bridging in the Mid-South region and across the state of Mississippi. We recognize our board chair, Jennifer Gear, our executive director, Dr. Michael O'Miner, our project director, Sister Lottie Miner. This has been a joy. I am Thomas Duke Robertson, and I hope to see you guys next month for our next third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. And to the ones who are on Zoom, if you would like to stay on and have a few questions for Dr. Key, you're more than welcome to.